Hi everyone, my name is Nasr. I am ICFJ Knight's Fellow in India, which basically means that I work with newsrooms here, including the Hindustan Times, which is one of the largest print dailies, and Z Media's upcoming English news network. I help them out with designing of workflows, or roles, or processes, or selection of tools and techniques to implement into their ongoing news processes, so that they can move away from the current format of a legacy medium with a small web product attached in a corner, or a mobile product attached in a corner, or a social product attached in a corner, to a core digital product with possibly attached legacy outlets, whether it's a TV station or a newspaper. I hope that makes sense. Today I'll be talking to you about the thought behind the workflow that I'm trying to implement in these newsrooms. And we'll move to the presentation. Just let me get my screen up for you. Okay, so what you're seeing right now is a very short 6-slide deck on what it means to truly try and integrate your news process into one workflow that can feed into whatever outlets you have for base media, whether it's mobile, digital, social, print, TV, radio even, right? And so we're trying to think of it as one integrated supply chain of content with common sourcing at one end of the funnel, and common distribution at the other end, with production and other stages in between. The advantage, if you turn this into one single workflow, is that various media that you have as outlets for your news product can tap into it as per their requirements and pull out content that they need when they need it, possibly repackage or rearrange it in the formats that they need. But there are economies of scale in the number of staff you use to produce this content, the amount of infrastructure you consume to produce content, and just reduces redundancies across the process. We call it a 5-content supply chain, which will have side effects beyond integration that could also impact on-the-job training, improve engagement with your audiences, and improve your growth and biggest metrics that you follow. Here's the 5 stages that we're talking about. We will talk about sourcing. We'll talk about then production, sourcing of leads for news, finding news as it's happening, finding related sources, finding related data points that we can put into the story, and any other kind of assets that we want to put into the story. Production, which is developing on these leads and turning it out into finished components of content, not necessarily fully fleshed stories. And then assembling it separately for each of the platforms that we operate on, which is essentially you get a feed of multiple components around the story, and then TV can pick the 10 that it finds most relevant to the way it wants to present the story, and print can pick a totally different subset of about 15, and so on and so forth. Again, making up these numbers that go along. And finally, once you have finished products on you can think about distributing these to your audiences through social, email, chat apps, or any other outlets. I'll explain what extension is at the end, which is more about once you have put out content, and once you have gone through the very fast news cycle that we're used to every day, what can you do to add more depth to your coverage around specific issues, and find ways to bring the audience into your newsroom or extend on those topics that you've covered so far. What you're seeing on screen right now is a quote from at least one thought leader about why this stage of each of these stages is uniquely important, and what the thought is behind building out these stages. So the first, sourcing, we're looking at something by the product manager for Yahoo News Digest. He talks about how their product digitally sources content from multiple feeds and creates a dossier of information around that particular story as it's happening, right? I think that's a if we manage to do that in our newsrooms, it's a fantastic launching board for what we want to do around that story. It's good to have any digital intelligence that we're able to gather in one place and then use that as a starting point for what we want to do with or around the story. The next bit is about production. Nick Newman talks about why it's important to not create content for just one platform, and instead break it down into its most basic components and then attach the right meta information or descriptions and so on and so forth, which allows it to be reused more effectively. You'll get a better sense of these as we do a slide on each of these processes. Ben Smith talks about when you're assembling or packaging your content for individual media, try not to assume that you have a whole chunk. Try not to imagine your audience as a whole, but instead imagine them as segments. And not all of them are going to follow every story that you do, right? There are shares of those from slices of that audience that will tune into stories that you have around automobiles versus another slice tuning into stories that you have around, let's say, pollution versus gender issues and so on and so forth. I think as publishers, we make the mistake of trying to address our audience as a whole and not necessarily targeting or personalizing it enough to individual slices of audiences. And distribution then is about trying to gather as much of data as we can around the audiences that we are servicing, and then using that to make decisions about what we give them, when we give it to them, and how we give it to them, and so on and so forth. Extension will talk about how you can integrate content with not just advertising, but possibly even commerce or events and so on and so forth to be able to make it more valuable, and find other ways of engaging your audience around the same story that you've already given to them through your traditional media outlets. So the question at the end of this is, how does this supply chain actually pan out in real life in a newsroom? Important to note will be that in traditional newsrooms, we group teams by skill. So you have design teams, or you have copy teams, or you have an engineering team in another corner, you have a dedicated video team, and so on, similar more teams. What SPADE, or this workflow, which is sourcing, production, assembling, distribution, extension, does instead is it groups people around deliverables. So you can actually think of a core sourcing team, which is a combination of editors working with engineers and data analysts around a single deliverable of sourcing all the information that's available out there, digitally or in real life, around a particular story theme. Let's look at sourcing in detail. So sourcing is built around the premise that we have access to a range of digital radars, if that's a term that I might use, to gather information around stories. The old school version of this would have been tuning into the police communication system of a radio, into police scanners, and figuring out what's happening where. Is there a crime? Is there a crime story happening somewhere, and can we deploy reporters accordingly? The digital equivalent of that can be a range of tools these days. Each brings its own unique value to how you make decisions around news. The way these slides are structured, I've put enough text out there for you to read along as we talk for a better understanding of what I'm talking about. But the core points that we're covering are highlighted in red. On the left, you'll see visuals with some captions around maybe tools that we're discussing or concepts that we're discussing. So on the left side, you've got screenshots from tools like Newswhip and Storyful. When I say digital radars, I'm talking about tools like Google Trends, which you should absolutely check out, which by country or by genre is able to list the top stories that audiences are actually searching for right now. This is not what audiences are consuming the most right now, but what they're actually searching for. So it gives you an interest graph that you can actually conduct your editorial planning around. You've also got on the alongside that, which is something that you can use alongside that in Newswhip Spike, which allows you to look at the top stories by their social velocity, or which is the rate at which they're aggregating likes and comments from their audiences, and that allows you to make the same editorial planning decisions from a different perspective. Is there a story out there that my competitors published which has been totally off our news list or day plan today, but seems to be performing very well on social, and can we start looking at what we can do around it? Others, I did a detailed post for it around Facebook, Twitter's curator, Storyful, and a bunch of other tools that we can start thinking of as digital radars. But the premise for this particular desk or team in a newsroom is, can we look at identifying the sources that we keep going back to for particular issues that we cover. So if I do pollution sitting here in Delhi, in India, I can build a list out of the sources that the experts that usually talk about pollution online or share research or data around pollution online, reporters even from competitors that cover the beat, niche publications or trade publications or research publications that print content or information around the particular issue, and track that as a list. And every time there is a spike or a dip in the amount of conversation in that list, a specific set of keywords, I actually get the system to alert me to here's a potential story, or why did you pay attention to that? The bit of that list is the foundation of what I'm talking about here. Conversation in that list, specific set of keywords, I actually get the system to alert me to here's a potential story, or why did you pay attention to that? The bit of that list is the foundation of what I'm talking about here. Conversation in that list. I think that's some feedback. I actually get the system to alert. Sort that out. I think Maite is not muted, which is why I'm getting some feedback in my end. Okay, I think that fixed that. Okay, going back to what we were just talking about. Okay, listening grid, right? So this is what I just talked about. You can actually construct a listening grid around beats that you track regularly, sources that you use regularly to track, and use it to track wires or social conversations, online searches, or even censor or open public data around keywords, topics, entities that are of interest to you. This can be politicians, celebrities, etc. Here's how a sourcing team actually looks in a newsroom, and I'm going to switch between this presentation and a organization diagram, which should possibly allow you to understand what a sourcing hub could be like in an integrated newsroom. It's a combination of 3 desks: alerts, assignments, and research. The alerts desk is responsible for what I was just talking about, which is tracking news leads across a set of digital radars, which of course includes what we always use, wires, but a lot of the other stuff that I talked about. And then creating immediate notifications or alerts across platforms. These can be alerts for the TV ticker, alerts for your app, notifications on your app, alerts for your social teams or web tickers, and so on, or even emails. But this is a team that's built around responding quickly to news and tracking it across whatever to us. And the third thing that they do is once they've identified a story that they're alerting on, for instance, let's say the Paris attacks have just happened, they've seen a spy conversation on the radar, they immediately start generating notifications around the story for various platforms. After that, they digitally source whatever assets they can from the ground to pass on to assignments. When I say assets from the ground, I mean any media that's been created on the ground by users close to the event that they found either on Twitter or other such tools. Any reactions have already gotten online from agencies called government, relief, disaster management agencies, etc. Once they're done, what assignments gets is essentially a dossier, like I mentioned earlier, right, around of all the available digitally around that story. And they now start following up with who can we contact in real life, and they tap into their network. If I expand what network here is, right, it's everyone, correspondents, stringers, contributors that we have employed, but also citizen journalists and other sources, and devices that we have in the field, which could be cameras, OB vans, and so on and so forth. Over a period of time, once they've done the same story enough, assignments can templates for stories. So think of it as we do a markets of open story every morning on the business desk in any newsroom. Assignment knows that it's always going to have pretty much the same structure. These are the values that the local markets have opened at this morning. Possibly a quote from our usual expert on the subject, and maybe some analysis towards the end. Short copy. So every time they get an alert, alerts gives them a dossier of reactions that they have to the markets opening this morning or any other data points. Assignments can just quickly start following up by dragging a template for the markets open story and either filling out that information based on what's already available to us, or assigning incomplete information in the template to reporters who work at the other end of the newsroom. Research is the third wheel in the sourcing hub, which is totally built around what do we already have in our archives, what do we already have in data sets that we have access to, or libraries that we have access to, or pre-populated research around beats that we've been tracking over a while. And they jump in with already existing information. So here's what's happening. Before we pass on the story to producers or to the reporting desk, reporters, we've already alerted our audience, number one. We've thought of notifications as the minimum viable prototype for a story. And we have already sourced whatever digital information we have around that story. And we also dipped into open data or archive data that we already have around that particular incident. So the reporter actually builds over that as they go out in the field. George, do let me know if there are questions as we go along. I understand this can be slightly complex for most people. One of the other things before we move on from sourcing is the last paragraph on the slide. Listening tools can, like we've already talked about, can also be used to identify, before we go off and produce a story, a potential audience, people who've already started talking about this incident. We know now, because we've been listening to them, that whenever we have a finished product or a finished story or URL to give to this audience, these are the handles that are absolutely going to be interested, which is evident in the fact that they follow the story. And we can maybe come back when we target these people and push a story to them. Next stage, production. So as I mentioned earlier, by the time it comes to production, you already have a stock of information that's available to them, right? And so this team of multimedia producers now, instead of getting assigned entire stories, gets assigned components that they need to fill out. So think of it as a particular story might require 2 quotes, 3 types of videos, 2 types of graphics, 1 type of bio around a person, maybe a backgrounder on the topic. And instead of seeing that as one complete story, you can actually break it down into bits and assign it to different people based on their expertise or skill sets. And how that helps is, A, it's broken down the problem and matched it to people who are best capable of completing. But you might also get these components at according to various deadlines. So for the digital outlets, at least, you're able to carry whatever you're getting as it happens. The second thing that benefit by doing it this way, by doing it in bits, is that you end up getting what's called structured content, which is you're building your story in terms of micro assets. Each of them has their own URL. Each of them has their own meta information. So all the attributes that you usually see around entire story pages. Sorry, I just realized my image keeps going black. I'm not sure why. Can you guys, Jeff, can you guys see my screen now? Sorry, let me see if I can stop sharing and start it again. I hope that's better. Are you seeing my screen now? Ouch. In which case, you should probably tweet out the link to the presentation so people can get a sense of what I'm talking about. I'm currently on slide 4. Can you confirm if it's on multiple systems or is this only on your connection? Okay, good. I'm told it's back. Okay, coming back to producing stories in bits instead of trying to produce them in one go and assigning them to one person. So 2 things happening here. Instead of assigning stories to, so what traditionally happens is you assign an idea, a story idea to a reporter, and not necessarily a specific angle, and they go out and they come back with, okay, this is what I got, and this is what we think we can do, and this is how we can peg it. In TV, they're accompanied by a cameraman, a camera crew, or someone else who can help them out. What we try to do in this format is build out tripods of reporters. So this is a team of 3, which is collectively should have reporting and copy skills to be able to report the story and actually do all the text work. A field producer, hopefully, who can do all the multimedia content production, which is photos, videos from the field, or even basic. And maybe someone back here in the newsroom at the desk who can put that together in some kind of organized package as it's going along. And now each of these tripods might not get assigned entire stories. Depending on their specialized skill sets, they might get assigned particular types of bits. So one tripod could actually get all the data bits that need to be used around the 4 big stories of the day. And I hope that. Now, the benefit of producing stories in bits is each of these bits, because they have their own meta information, are searchable and reusable information in your archive. So think of it like this. I could actually think of the Nepal earthquake as a story with 50 possible components. And once all of those have been produced, I could actually search only quotes versus only photos versus only videos. And I'll show you something of what that could look like. Just give me a second. This is a prototype of what a story could look like with structured content. There are multiple organizations across the world which are trying to work on this problem. I know the BBC Story Lab is trying a project called, which kind of looks at this. I'll let the page load while we continue to talk about this. To the left, what you're seeing is shots of various products on the Texas Tribune website. They're a particularly unique case study because they're able to build products as a layer, various products or tools as a layer over their content library because they structure a lot of their content. So what you're seeing here is Campaign Finance Explorer, X Explorer, or Tetra, or The Wire, or even Tripedia, which is their wiki on topics and people that they cover regularly. To reuse that content in multiple contexts because they produced in bit and structured it. Allowing it to work not just as a dead archive, but as more of a content API. Once this is done, and going back to, let's see, has this page loaded? I think there's something wrong with my internet connection. But going back to what a production hub could look like. So there's a reporting desk, which, as I mentioned earlier, is 3 primary skills. The first being reporting, copy, voiceovers. The second being everything to do with field production, editing, and transmission. And third would be design and multimedia packaging. But these could be supported by advanced, for certain advanced requirements around stories, a specialized design desk. You're now clubbing all design-related functions, graphics, animations, illustrations, promos, which are particularly important in TV. or even graphics, you're not no longer looking at them as separately as print graphics versus TV graphics, but a single team that can produce graphics that can be used across platforms. Similarly, an advanced multimedia team, which could be for advanced audio, photo, or video production. An interactives desk, which is a combination of people who can help you with advanced UI UX that you need to produce around stories. And there are developers and data artists who can help you with specific kinds of visualization. And of course, the resources desk, which is people who issue you devices or help with basic lighting, broadcast engineering, and so on and so forth. But here's what we've done so far. We've covered 2 hubs, and I tried to explain what they do in 2 slides. Each hub has multiple desks, and by the time you get an output from the production hub, here's what's already happened. People have already seen notifications around the story. Assignment has already built a bucket list of all the components that they want around that story. Researchers pre-filled some of those buckets. Let's say they had 50 components around a story. Research might pre-fill 10 of them based on open data or archives that they have access to. And each of these components have now been assigned to people in the production hub who have filled these out. So what you could get is, and for lack of a better metaphor, you can say 50 different types of single story by the time it comes out of the production hub. Once it hits assembling, here's what's happening. You've got custodians of individual platforms, mobile, web, TV, audio, or even print. And each of them can now access the same pool of 50 finished cards around the story and pick whatever is A, relevant to them, and B, reorder them according to whatever their individual platform preferences are or how their individual audiences behave differently from audiences on other platforms. So here's how each of those desks are working. Mobile desk, the first task that they need to be doing is story adaptation. They've got a pool of 50 cards to pick from around the story. They figure out which subset of those, 10, 12, 15, whatever, are relevant to the story the way they want to tell it on mobile, and they reorder it or repackage it according to whatever they want. And of course, there's a range of A/B testing that they could do, which is testing multiple options for headlines, getting a quick sense of which headline seems to be working best for which location. And you could have audiences logging in from different parts of the world onto the same story page, but experiencing a different color image and headline because that seems to be working best for their psychographic or demographic. And of course, tracking content analytics on software like and optimizing it accordingly. I'll show you what this means when we go back to the presentation. So this is a slide on this everything. Their task is testing and optimizing for impact because the content's already been produced. Think of them as merchandising editors. So the way in suits, hypermarkets, you've got, and retail is a perfect analogy for this. You have separate buying teams in supermarket, people who decide what we need to stock, right? That's the sourcing hub in our newsroom. Then you've got people who are dedicated to fulfilling those buying requirements, which is production. And once you have all of those items lined up, how do you present them on shelves? How do you order them? Which shelves stand right next to each other, and so on and so forth. I'll talk briefly about what you're seeing in visuals on this slide. Bottom are from a tool called Visual Revenue, which was eventually acquired by Outbrain. This is the headline and cover image testing that I'm talking to you. I was mentioning earlier. What they also let you do is the photograph on the right side. They also let you test a story for various positions on your home pages or section pages. So you're actually able to compare whether it's performing best on position 2 or position 3 or position 7 on a list of top stories on your site. The really small visual that you're seeing on the left, and if you're accessing this presentation through the direct URL, you could actually zoom in, is from the New York Times package mapper, which they developed in-house. And I see this is the kind of work that the assembling team possibly could do. They built a visualization to see how people were consuming stories on the site. And what they noticed was, if I could just point to this, the big red bubble that you see, it was a story that was getting the most audience that particular day, but it seemed to be dead end. because audiences were dropping off from the site after getting to this. They wouldn't have been able to even realize that this was happening because if they hadn't visualized that information, right? And here's what that actually meant when they started to check this out. It was a story on a crime that happened in New York, which involved one of the athletes from a major sporting tournament at that point in time. I think it was the Winter Olympics. And so it was a crime story appearing on the sports page. So the tournament was attracting a lot of people up to the sports page. They all found this crime story very interesting, and so jumped to it. But when they landed on this story, the rest of the website assumed that they were now in the crime section. So all the related stories that they were seeing were actually local crime. It wasn't what they'd actually come to the site for, which was sports. And so they were able to reassign the story to the sports section and actually solve that issue in real time. That's merchandising for stories, right? This is also where, so assembling is essentially where once you've produced all the content base that you needed to have around a particular story, you can now split it by medium or language. In the mind map that I referred to earlier, I just showed you desks for various platforms, but you can also imagine desks for various titles within. So think the publisher as Vox, but they've got SB Nation, Eatery, and Vox.com itself. Access a centralized content pool, and each then pick up at the assembling stage whatever is relevant to their individual titles or media or even language platforms. In India, language is very important because we have 28 states and possibly 10 languages per state. So that's a lot of languages to publish in. And in most newsrooms, we end up having operate like two totally different companies. The Hindi language newspaper, very different from the English language newspaper, very different from the Bengali language newspaper. This kind of a workflow could possibly allow them to integrate at least the sourcing or production levels in their news gathering process, and then only start to customize them for their individual language requirements, whether it involves translation or repackaging for a particular type of audience at the assembling stage. The second paragraph, the important point, is what I already covered in the package mapper, which is assembling also tracks and defines relationships between stories so that they can create better combinations of stories in digest newsletters, etc., to milk that content more. So in terms of what is each team accountable for, right? And I'll just flash back through each of the previous slides. So the first one is the word that you see underlined. Their job is find, right? The second is produce, of course, but for reuse in a way that it can be reused. 90% of the content that gets produced in newsrooms, let's say by midnight any day, is never really used again, except for the fact that it shows up on Google, God bless them. It's not designed for really reuse. And so if we could do structured content to make it pluggable anywhere or reusable anywhere, that allows us to do a lot more with a one-time effort. Sorry. Okay, I think there was a question. Okay, I'll take that in a second. Okay, third team, assembling. Again, they are primarily responsible for impact once the content has already been produced. So in terms of, and before I get to distribution, I actually should get to distribution. The next one is responsible for growing our audience, right? So the way I would differentiate between assembling and distribution is assembling is responsible for, irrespective of whether you have 10 people in the room or 100 people in the room, they're responsible for making sure that each one of the people in the room spends at least an hour in it, right? They need to be interesting enough or compelling enough for people to engage with the content. Distribution has nothing to do with what happens inside the room. They're responsible more for making sure that we don't have just 100 people in the room, but actually maybe 100,000. And these are the people who are responsible for reach. They're responsible for getting enough of your audience into the door, which is why you see those two screenshots that you're looking at right now on your screen. The first is from the audience lifecycle in the now very popular digital innovation report by the New York Times. Audience lifecycle is fairly standard jargon in businesses like e-commerce or other internet product businesses, where they talk about how you need to be bucketing audiences by how many of them are just new people or flybys or people that you don't know anything about, versus people that are identified audiences. You either have social handles or email IDs or cookies information to identify them and know that they're actually coming back again. And so it progresses, right? You go from identified reader to someone who's actually an engaged reader who likes or comments on your content, to an advocate who actually pushes or shares your content. To, it can actually also come back, which is to any one of them dipping from their standard level of activity and starting to slip, where if you know that they're now moved into the slipping bucket, you're able to create automated alerts that possibly push them back into the desired level of activity. And I'll give you an example of what that means. So on Amazon, let's say I buy a trimmer or a shaver, right? The first thing that happens after that purchase is I start getting newsletters that are suggesting that I buy all other kinds of shaving products, everything, even to nose or ear trimmers. If we can do that equivalent in news, which is when a reader starts to, someone who used to come 10 times a month to our site, dips to, let's say, 6 times a month, can we send them something that says, "Hi, Jeff, we haven't had time to come back to our site as often as you used to. Here are the top 10 stories that you missed in tech, politics, and sports." And what that tells you is, A, we knew the user, which is why we were able to reach out to them. B, we knew that they had dipped from their usual level of activity, which is and so there was how and the why. And the third is we tech, sports, and business instead of politics, entertainment, or whatever, which tells us we know them the most. And so we want to reach out to them with. And so this team essentially is, everyone manages all those that we have for reaching out to our audiences. So they are channel managers. They're also the team that owns the entire audience lifecycle or sits on our audience data, ensures that we know enough about our audience to be able to give them what they want, but also over time understand what they want more from us and let that inform editorial planning. The second screenshot that you're seeing is an example of is a tool called SPADE Social, which is something that newsrooms can use to operate the equivalent of a digital call center. Telcos, since in India, the biggest players is Airtel. I know they're big in Africa too. Their Twitter handle is on the lookout for people talking about their brand, and they respond to complaints or even positive feedback. If we can do the in news, which is look out for where our story is getting online, and figure out a way to possibly loop, participate in those conversations, number one, and possibly even loop back reporters who actually created the story into this conversation that has the potential to blow up and possibly even go viral. So tracking what's happening where around our content and really figuring out a way to long tail that. For you who went through the whole black screen thing that was happening a while ago, we're on slide number 6 right now. We're talking about how distribution profiles audiences to grow them eventually. I'll now refer to the mind map so you know what a distribution team could possibly look like. And of course, we've already gone through the assembling up. Each of these teams are pretty similar. You've got story adaptation, web desk, TV desk is script adaptation, and so on and so forth. I've got an interesting anecdote about assembling that I'll come back. Okay, but distribution hub, you have 3 kinds of desks. You've got what's called a seeding desk, which is what we usually do when we call it social media in newsrooms, which is push content, right? They manage the entire queue of content that we're pushing out. It seems like a small enough task in newsrooms. I've seen most newsrooms, right? Let's say staff of about 500 for the legacy product, which is, let's say, a newspaper, maybe 50 for the website, a tenth of it for the website, and then 5 for the social team, a tenth of that. And so if you've got a staff of 500 and they're all producing 1 story each, that social team of 5 ends up with 500 prospective social posts that they need to write. And that's for 1 platform. If they need to write them for 3 different platforms, that's 500 to 3, 1,500, and that's not humanly possible. Which is why they try to use tools like Social Flow or SPADE Social to manage a queue of content that they need to push out on channels. Ideally, reporters filing the stories would draft a social post while they're submitting the story. So seeding gets a queue that they can approve or edit or time or schedule according to when specific types of audiences tune into their channels. So for instance, maybe my sports audience tunes in after lunch every day. So even if the sports story got published early, unless it was breaking, of course, I might slate that for later to push it out on social media after lunch, which is when it would be able to find the most audience. What they also do is calendars, which is, and I just, let's see if you can see some of that, which is maintaining what kind of content do we generate repeatedly, whether it's on 3 intervals or daily or monthly or seasonal and so on, or around occasions, right? So think of it like there's a publisher called Quint in India, which does a very interesting newsletter at 11:59 every night, a minute before midnight, which is stories that will make headlines tomorrow. And that serves as a good roundup of protests that you can expect the next day, IPOs maybe that you can expect the next day, or major announcements that you can expect the next day, like the latest labor statistics or whatever. That's a good primer on what would that can help people plan the next day, right? Plan what information they're looking out for tomorrow. So the seeding desk essentially makes sure that we push out content once we've produced it, and we push it out at the right time across the right platforms in the right packaged formats. The engagement desk is a separate part of social. So we're breaking social down into 3 major components. The first was what we already covered in alerts, which was discovering content around news happening right now and using it to send out notifications. The second was what we are calling seeding, which is a term used mostly in advertising, but which is about making sure that the rest of our content, which is possibly not breaking, is out there on social media on the right platforms at the right time. And the third is engagement, which I talked about earlier when I was talking about SPADE Social, which is listening to your audience, tracking comments, responding to them in real time, and of course organizing stuff like live chats, AMAs, any kind of social driven activity that they can set up to create better engagement around our content. The third desk on distribution is what deals with the tasks that I was talking about earlier on the slide, which is audience lifecycle management, owning our report cards, right? So key tasks would be audience lifecycle management and performance benchmarking. What that means essentially is, do we know the average number of page views that a politics story should get versus an entertainment story, so that we're not holding both of them to the same benchmark? Entertainment will obviously do 10 times better or 20 times better. And so that we can realistically look at what's working on our site and what's not, and make corrections accordingly. They also focus on product management and the optimization of various features on the site. Again, looking at what's working, what's not working, and what changes we can make. And they're the ones who own all the tools that are being used across the newsroom and produce reports around them consistently. What you'll not see on this mind map is extension, but I'll talk about it when we come to to our slides. The last team is extension, which is responsible for, like I said, the way earlier, distribution was responsible for growing audiences. Extension is what is totally just focused on not doing stuff in real time or responding to news fast, but doing stuff that will ensure that we win a particular news cycle as the publisher that got the story right and connected with the largest share of the audience for that particular story. So once you've got finished content and once you've discovered content, produced the various assets around it, served it up to our audiences as finished stories on URLs or on TV or on print, but primarily digital right now. And distribution has pushed it out across all possible platforms. Extension now looks at, out of the 50 narratives or story ideas that we chase during the day, which are the top 10 that are giving us the largest share of our audience attention, and what more can we do to milk that audience for all it has. So if when a story has started to itch for the day and started to decline on that graph, on its consumption graph, extension makes sure we either bring some of our most engaged audiences into the newsroom for a direct interaction, whether it was record that show, share it with the rest of the world, or organize small in-field events, or possibly identify opportunities to partner with brands while that news cycle is still on, so that we can before it completely declines and moves off the public's radar, we can actually nudge it for a bit and extend that graph for a news cycle for a slightly longer duration. They're also the kind of people that try to figure out if there are slices of our content that we can possibly turn into campaigns. So think of it as we've been doing multiple stories out of Delhi. Traffic is a major issue. Pollution is a major issue. And so if we decide that pollution is something that's consistently delivering for us, audiences for us, can we look at extending that to a campaign that we do consistently, maybe one story a week for the next 2 months, and so on and so forth. They have a laser focus on figuring out what can we turn into a continued longer term initiative, so that the audience that we captured around that particular issue stays with us a while longer. An example, the screenshots that you're looking at are in newsroom conversations, an example from India called Express Adda, but also annual events like Mashables Mashies Awards, or New York Times' Times Journeys, which is exclusive experiences with reporters. So food correspondent doing a tour of the top restaurants in Delhi for a particular type of cuisine, maybe once a quarter, and inviting people who've signed up for our loyalty or membership programs to come in and take part into it. So again, the highlight here being, what can we do 360 with this particular story? Can we work like, can this team work like kind of a ad agency within the newsroom, or a brand studio being the right better word within the newsroom, to figure out how we can extend this story across all other possible options. Giving people a behind the news experience, turning content to campaigns, and building a loyalty program out of it. Here's a recap of what we discussed. So sourcing builds leads, production builds content around those leads, assembling builds around that content, distribution builds reach for that high performance, and extension then tries to ensure that we build value with all of that performance and reach that we've built. In terms of the newsroom is organized too, SPADE is less of a hierarchy and more of a holacracy, and I'll explain what that means when I go back to the mind map. Where again, I'm reading out from the slide essentially, but it encourages integration of teams across platforms. It creates opportunities for on-the-job training because when you look at it overall, most of these skills haven't been developed as specialized functions within newsrooms, larger. You potentially have the opportunity to people reduce their burnout, because what happens if they go from junior correspondent to senior to principal to chief to it's the same. And by rotating across desks, you're able to burn out, but you're also allowing them to grow and that horizontal growth keeps them motivated. It turns them into the wide range of experience for you yourself, and more or less an on the job. To speak more about what I was talking about earlier as a holacracy, so in the newsroom that we're trying to work with, for instance, we're trying to do managing producers for, so everyone's a producer, no editor, and so on. Everyone's producing data or reports or alerts that you look at. The producers change according to of seniority, away from training assistant within the desk, the leads for each of the desks, but I'm told my audio is bad right now, but I hope you're getting more. Executives essentially lead back.
Hi again. I think okay. For some reason, I can't get back onto the Hangout through my computer, but I'm trying to do this on my phone. And I was wrapping up anyway, but let's see if I can help you look at that last slide that I was talking about, or just maybe talk you through it. So if you see, hold on, just give me a, sorry. Very good image on the phone, but let me see. Just give me a second. Just walk you through this. So I talked about executive producers leading from leading the teams as if as not from the top, but essentially from behind, by providing them with the tools and resources that they need to be able to do their jobs better and building the right processes and guidelines out. But eventually these desks come under hubs, and you have managing producers for each of those hubs, which can be much more senior managerial talent who bring in more of strategic expertise on how this needs to work. So you've got operational leadership on. So you've I think I'm back on the system, so which is good. When I shut my phone. Sorry about that. Jeff, can you confirm that you're seeing me? Quick screen share. Wait. Okay, we're back. So you now have managing producers who head these hubs, and the responsibilities, operational, are on executive producers, strategic are on managing producers. But you have 4 senior editors in the newsroom who can work together to make sure that this entire process actually delivers. I am now going to go back to the few questions that Jeff sent me while we were still talking about this. Okay, so how do you integrate verification and corrections into this workflow? So when we talked about assignments right at the start of the newsletter, right? That's the team that's responsible. So for digital information, for looking at them and making sure this is verified and then using them in their alerts. Assignment follows up to make sure they haven't messed up with anything. But most of your verification takes place right at the top of the workflow. Any corrections that can possibly need to be made later, output the teams, individual assembling teams might realize that later in the cycle and deal with them directly at that end. I think there was a question earlier too. Are there any apps or software programs that newsrooms follow the SPADE workflow? You don't necessarily have a single solution that helps you do all of this. Each of these is about using a combination of tools. So if I could run you through the tools that we will eventually be using in our flow. Alert for alert. Sorry about my connection. I hope I'm back. But we're just wrapping up. I think I answered the last question, which was about going through the tools that we use at various stages of the mind map. It's about using a portfolio of tools, identifying what works best for your newsroom. So what I was saying essentially is there isn't a single solution that can help you do
all of this in one go. Ideally, you would need you would want to look for a core news management system that that can also give you output for TV and print. We're exploring options right now here in India. There are some enterprise systems which are clunky and not very pretty or user friendly, but they do publish to from the same news management workflow to web and to print and to TV. There's one called NewsWrap here in India. I'm not a fan of what it looks like, but we're still trying to figure out if we can build a custom solution to do this. Apart from that, though, there's a bunch of tools that every desk uses where they sit. So sourcing, they use all kinds of radars from Dataminer to NewsWeb to Storyful to Facebook Signal, Google Trends, and so on and so forth. Assignments would use something Trello or any kind of workflow management tool to look at what stories are we doing right now and who has what task been assigned to and what's the progress on the task. We use Slack to bring communication all the across the newsroom together into one communication channel. Hate email. Research and reporting, etc., jump in for any queries or clarifications that they have through Slack, even when they're in the field. But essentially upload submissions once they finish tasks, check them out on Trello and upload directly into whatever CMS we use. For once you hit assembling, you could be using a combination of solutions. So TV rundowns are managed by software like Avid's iNews or Octopus and several other playlist managers. Ditto for radio. For print, of course, you've got print layout managers like Quark and InDesign. For web, whatever CMS you use is okay. Of course, you have custom hacks on WordPress, Drupal, and so on. But I think it's time that most CMS solution providers realize that they won't be able to do print, radio, TV, web separately. They need to figure out systems that can be one-stop solutions to push to all of these platforms. So the solution itself allows people to integrate. Distribution, we use Sprout Social to both listen to our audience and manage publishing, but there's fantastic solutions like Buffer, Social Flow, etc., that also do the same job. So there's no go-to tools necessarily. There's a range of tools, and there are trade-offs and wins when you choose one over the other. Anyway, there's no clear winner, to be very honest. For engagement, again, listening through TweetDeck, responding to them possibly through Sprout or even directly on whatever platform they're engaging with us on. And for growth, we use Parsley, but you also have Chartbeat. But the core thing here is Google Analytics can be very complex for a lot of people. And there's a bunch of editor-friendly or newspaper-friendly analytics tools out there that you could use. Like I said, we use Parsley. If I get into talking about what each of these tools are and why they're very good for us, that could be an entire hour-long session on its own. So that was my spiel. I hope I was able to get most of it across, despite the fact that it is a very complex topic. And I had a bad connection towards the end and kept blacking out, I'm told, on screen, and even the audio went out. But thanks for participating in the Dow Jones webinar series hosted by the International Center for Journalists. I hope this was useful. If you have any more questions, tweet at me at NASRHADI, that's my first name and last name, or tweet directly to the ICFJ handle, which is ICFJ or ICFJ Knight. And look out for, if you maybe came in late or missed the earlier part of this, you'll look out for a post on ignet.org, which will have a recap of video of this entire webinar. Thanks, and I look forward to hearing from you.